Welcome back to What the Hype. I am Eric, and I'm inviting you to pick up your guitar, step up to the cameras, the microphone, because today we're covering the hype behind the mega Hollywood music biopic. I am joined by my lovely co-hosts, Andrew and Pam. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Excited to talk about tragic music stories captured on film.
Tragic, heartbreaking, inspiring, and some good music along the way.
All of the emotions. I just watched, I can't believe it's been 5 years already, but I just watched Rocket Man, and I was so inspired. It made me want to dance on the couch.
The book is very good too.
Biopic has it all. So before we get into our discussion, please make sure you, the listener, are following us on social media and your favorite podcast app. Just search for What the Hype Podcast, and you can catch full video episodes on our YouTube. So, bit of an overview here on the music biopic. This is sort of what we mean when we are discussing this. While films about musicians certainly existed as early as the 1950s, beginning in the late 1970s, cinema history was made with several high-profile, award-winning, and critically acclaimed films about musicians like Buddy Holly, Jim Morrison, and even Mozart. Amadeus, in that film in particular, won 8 Academy Awards. And then throughout the 90s, there were some modest entries. And again, the mid-2000s is where the genre really exploded, with Chronicles of the Lives of Bobby Darin, Johnny Cash, Notorious B.I.G., Edith Piaf. The music biopic, as we know it today, can at times be formulaic, and this formula has even been parodied a few times in movies including Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story. And in a similar fashion, there are mockumentaries like This Is Spinal Tap, or films about music and touring bands. They all serve to showcase the highs and lows of what it's like to be in the music business. And some musician biographies are actually produced as musicals, which is a different genre that we're not talking about, but those musicals might also get movie adaptations. So it's a whole thing. I think the thing that best summarizes music biopics, you guys tell me your thoughts, is that they offer both a window into the personal lives of the stars in question, big name celebrities you may not know what their real life was like. And it also celebrates the life and the music of the person. So they do really cover a lot of ground.
Yeah, and I think it's refreshing from the viewer's standpoint to see that these people's lives aren't perfect. They actually might be more like your own life than you realize. And when you were just pointing out that a lot of these movies came out in the mid-2000s, I was thinking how Hollywood is always desperate for a new idea. And in some ways, they've kind of run out of ideas. But biopics, for many artists, and many artists who we don't even know of today, could come out, years or decades later, because it's just ripe to be, these stories are often ripe to be adapted, and it gives studios kind of like this easy way to create a film that could be very profitable.
Yeah, and oftentimes when there's like dissonance between when a band was famous and when the biopic is there, is like either following a star's death or a new biography. New biographies are being written all the time. And so it's possible that, a certain biopic will be based on a specific biography. So there's probably dozens about Buddy Holly, for instance, but that film was about one, biopic or one biography that had been written. So it's really interesting as far as the business goes. I believe we probably have all seen some biopics, but I did want to ask, which ones have we seen? Which ones do we like?
I enjoy watching them, despite the fact that they can be formulaic. I almost kind of find the formulaic a bit soothing. And I think that one of the reasons why people tend to gravitate to stories like this is because they're real stories. And at the end of the day, it's all about somebody achieving the American dream. Most of the time, these people come from nothing and they build themselves up. And everybody loves an underdog story. Everybody loves a success story. And I think that if you look at what America is built upon, it is this idea that somebody can come from absolutely nothing and become the biggest person in the world or in the country or, the top person on the radio. So I think that people find that inspiring. And I've definitely fallen prey to the idea of like something like that being inspiring. I also just like, for the purposes of my job, tend to watch most of the biopics that come out, or like most of the recent ones, because they tend to be good Oscar bait. And I try and watch most of the ones that, like most of the movies that are nominated for the bigger awards as well. But as somebody that is like generally interested in music and music history, I also just like the idea of biopics as a good jumping off point to kind of spark interest in like a musician that maybe like whose catalog I kind of know, but whose story I don't really know. And I always go into it knowing that it's not going to be fully factual because it is based on a true story, not this is like the real life true events that actually happened. Like if you look at something like Rocket Man, like we know that Elton John wasn't actually floating around the Troubadour when he first played there, right?
Well, I don't know. Drugs in the 70s were pretty interesting from what
But yeah, so I think it's a good jumping off point for anybody to like maybe like get interested in somebody and fall down a good rabbit hole and learn a little bit more and then do their own research on the side.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think for us, we're millennials. A lot of these biopics follow older generations of artists who we didn't grow up following because maybe they're past their prime today. And I think it's a wonderful educational experience for us. I know, Pam, you just said these stories aren't exactly what happened, but some of them are, and they can inspire you to go and learn more. I think one big question a lot of us always have after watching a biopic or something else that's based on a true story is say to ourselves, wait, did that actually happen? And then we go hit up Wikipedia or go read a biography or something like that to learn the details. As somebody who has always enjoyed classic rock, I loved Rocket Man. I loved Bohemian Rhapsody, the Queen biopic. And that one was done in partnership with the band. And the Rocket Man movie, too, that was based on Elton's book. And I thought Elton's book was a very honest portrayal of his life. He doesn't shy away from the problems he's experienced, and the movie doesn't shy away from them either. On the other hand, Bohemian Rhapsody, as we'll talk about in a little bit, did pull back on some of what really happened with Freddie Mercury and Queen.
Yeah. Pam, something you said is like just really so stunning to me is that the biopic as a film is sort of American in slant. You know, it really is dominated by this American dream thing. And even though, for instance, Rocket Man, since we're on the subject of Elton John, even though he's British, a lot of that film takes place sort of in LA when he's living in LA, and that Hollywood is very much where, you know, Tower Records and the music industry is really headquartered. So a lot of it has just this American, I almost want to say sensibility too. And, you know, the hardest drugs and the hardest parties were in America in the 70s, apparently.
And I think even when you watch those movies and you frame it, it is this like you see these like the younger version of these big stars. They have like stars in their eyes at the idea of making it in America, because even if they make it big in the UK, for example, since we're on the subject of, you know, Elton John, Freddie Mercury, Queen, like they know that the big market to hit is America. And they always build it up like, we only get one shot at this, boys, unless you're Oasis, and then you get lucky and you get two shots because you fucked up the first one. But, you know, like there's like this whole momentum of this building. It's like, you only get one shot to make it big. We have to pick the right song. We have to pick the right venue. You have to play the best you've ever played. And so it is like satisfying if the buildup is well done, you know? And in something like a Rocket Man, I think it really was.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk a little bit more about this formula and structure, because on the one hand, all stories about a living person might start with their birth and might end with their death, but along the way, you get a lot of fun shenanigans. Something in particular about a person's birth and their younger years lately. I saw this in Rocket Man last night, but I think I first saw it in Beyond the Sea, which came out in 2004. It's the Bobby Darin biopic. He's interacting like adult Bobby Darin, or current day, you know, whatever, as the movie opens, is interacting with his younger self. And it's really, an actor playing younger him, and they're having a scene together, they're having moments together. Rocketman definitely does this very effectively too. And I think that's really an interesting psychological experiment to like do on yourself as a person. Like, who was I? What were my hopes? What were my dreams? What were my aspirations at the time? But ultimately, it's also just a good vehicle for the audience to get familiar without it seeming like, who's this kid I'm watching? Is like to have maybe an opening musical number and then the adult artist leads you into, this is my childhood, just seems like a natural way. I really like that sort of modern trend, I want to say. But yeah, I mean, essentially they're born, then they get at some point introduced to music, whether it's Weird Al getting an accordion for one of his birthdays, or Elton John being plopped down in front of the family piano because he's very inspired by it, or Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who's courting kings and being paid to play.
Yeah, and they have that moment where it's like, wow, this is amazing. All this power I now wield. I can express my thoughts and feelings through music. And I think whether or not you're an artist, you actually can find something to relate in that feeling. Because I think most of us have moments where we discover our passions.
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting to me too, because music is so personal. Especially in a post Elvis rock and roll world, he really gave rise to like the individual songwriter and performer. Before the Beatles in the mid 60s, people didn't write their own songs. And the Beatles really took that, and into the 60s and 70s, you get a lot of singer-songwriters that are writing and performing their own music. It's such a personal way to get to know them.
I would say on the flip side to that, I'm thinking of two of my favorite biopics in particular, which I'll talk about a little bit more later on. It's like the opposite to that is the main person finds the music and they are passionate about it, but there's somebody that's pushing them. Like, you have to be great. You have to keep like practicing if you want to be great, but it's not always fun, you know? A lot of times if it's like a parent, I'm thinking specifically of like Joe Jackson of the Jackson 5, who really pushed his kids to practice all the time, to the point where like there were days they didn't want to do it. There was a lot of times when they just wanted to be kids. He really like robbed his kids in a way of his childhood, of their childhoods. But at the same time, like, these people do go on to have like their own appreciation for the music. But the question is like, how do they come back to that after falling out of love with it for whatever reason? So some of those stories are sometimes my favorites, because like it can be inspiring to see somebody find their passion, but it can also equally be as inspiring to find somebody, to watch somebody find their way back to their passion.
Yeah. In most cases, it's sort of a high point in the movie when they get famous, but shortly thereafter, there seems to be a de-evolution into drugs and alcohol to deal with some of the real pressures that come with being famous, or just the lifestyle of touring, being on the road, being exposed to so many people, so many opportunities that ordinarily that no normal person has that life. It's been very glamorized over time, but so many of these biopics are really showcasing the drug addictions and really recovery of its main stars. It's very unusual to be chronicling a musician and not have some sort of drug abuse in the film.
Yeah. It's sad sometimes too, because like with a lot of these people that have passed, you know how the story goes. And so as soon as like the drugs get introduced, you almost like get this like pit in your stomach, right? Like I was watching the Whitney Houston biopic that came out a couple of years ago, I Want to Dance with Somebody. Yeah. And we all know that her story ends in tragedy, but it's really sad to see like the decline of the person. I didn't particularly love Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, but it's the same situation where you see somebody getting taken advantage of, and it's really sad to see them slowly deteriorate from like this, like their greatest version of themselves, to somebody that has really fallen from grace.
Yeah, the movie Love and Mercy, it's the Brian Wilson biopic I saw a few years ago. Yeah, again,
that one was a tough watch though.
Yeah, very difficult to watch the star who, in many cases, is funding all the people around him in his inner circle that are taking advantage of him. Rocketman has a similar sort of trajectory as well. It's rough. Ultimately, whether the person dies from their addiction or is rehabilitated or steps in between, I tend to find that these films end on a high note. Probably not Amadeus, but the rare exception. I think the best of these movies are wistful and do, because they're celebrations of the music, feel the need to say this person's life was this way and we should feel happy about it.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think for these artists or their estates or their families, it's an opportunity for them to get their version of the story out there. And I don't necessarily mean that as a criticism. I think all these artists deserve the opportunity to get their story adapted in a way that they want. And then they can let others, through books or whatever else, tell the true story or the truer story. But I do appreciate it from the idea of these artists want to get their version of events out there, because a lot of people might come in and have ulterior motives and try to paint a different picture. And I don't think that's right.
I think that's why, to your point, you're starting to see a lot of larger artists like try and work on the first version, at least, of their biopics before they pass away. So obviously Elton John is a good example of that. Aretha Franklin was like very adamant about wanting Jennifer Hudson to play her before she passed. Like in her, she was like, if there's going to be a biopic about me, I want it to be J Hud, and she got what she wanted. Madonna is also like very hands-on with the biopic that's coming out about her. There's countless other examples. And on one hand, like going back to the factuality of it, you have to understand that you're watching a version of someone's life that they're telling you. So there's context that only they can provide, which is nice. But then you also have to take into account that, if they want to gloss over certain parts, then that's their prerogative.
Yeah, definitely having an understanding that it's not the full story, and what 2-hour film really could be a full story of anything, is kind of important for literacy, I guess, when coming to biopics. The other thing I'll say, and it's because in all cases, I think the people we're learning about, it's a celebrity. It's amazing to see, and sad, how much trauma is in their life. I'm thinking of Walk the Line. Johnny Cash, lost his younger brother in a devastating accident as a kid. Elvis, it's well known, had a twin. I'm not sure if that comes up in the movie by Baz Luhrmann, but died when he was born. And some say he was always felt, kind of haunted or needing to be a certain way about him. Rocket Man, Elton John has so much self-hatred in as depicted in that film, and his parents just do not treat him like he is special, and he has a lot of self-doubt and a lot of regret as a result of that. The thing for me is, yes, there's an angle to this which make that prime for award season when you see a dramatic role in an otherwise cheery music movie, but for me, it also speaks to some component of the real world, the real world that these people sort of escape from as they ascend into stardom is as devastating as the stories being depicted on film here.
Yeah. And conveniently, all films need conflict. So these biopics are just perfect for Hollywood adaptation, because you need those moments and you need to see the artist get through it or maybe fall apart because of it.
Hit all the story beats, right?
Yeah.
Like if you look at like Save the Cat, for example, or even like A Hero's Journey, it's kind of all there.
Absolutely. So in just a moment, we'll continue our discussion on music biopics. But first, here is a word from our sponsors. One thing I want to ask, as we were just talking about, it is common for music biopics movies to depict the lead character's struggle with childhood trauma, self-worth issues, drug abuse, and more. But at times, I feel like it might be a bit much and awards driven. Is Hollywood preoccupied with the drama? Or do they really seem to be attempting to get it right?
I think that because stars, as you see them, seem untouchable, especially stars from past generations. I think the stars of today don't really seem as untouchable because of social media. They feel like more within grasp. But if you're looking at the bigger like names from the 60s, 70s, 80s, that's still the age of the untouchable rock star. And so I think like if you see them humanized by struggle, then it's easier to relate. But I don't think that like I'm sure there are plenty of people that had like perfectly happy childhoods that also managed to be famous.
I don't know. They haven't made those music biopics
yeah,
yet.
exactly. Because they're not interesting, like nobody wants everything to completely work out. It's like I have a perfect life and then I had a perfect career and here are my perfect Grammys.
And from these tough experiences, now you also have to be a talented writer and artist, but from these tough experiences, you can write new songs that others can relate to because so many people go through the same problems that you do.
That's true. I think about like, this is not a biopic, but like when there's a documentary on Harry Styles writing his first solo album, and the producer who was working with was like, you got to go out and live. And when like, go do that and come back and then we'll write your album, like, so I think that is part of it too.
It is kind of like we as podcasters, we couldn't podcast if we didn't follow
we gotta go out
news.
and touch grass,
right? Follow pop culture, socialize, get an idea of what's going on in the world in order to talk about it. Similarly, artists can't write songs unless they are living in the same world that we are and gaining experiences that can inform their writing.
Yeah, that's well said. It makes sense that the things they need to know the things that they're writing about.
Mm-hmm.
So in the event of a musician's death, right, there's plenty of examples of musicians who died way too soon. And Freddie Mercury is a good example of that. He could still be with us today if things had gone a different way. And, what in that case, and I mention it because Bohemian Rhapsody has some very egregious factual errors within it. What are we owed as audiences? What do producers, screenwriters owe to the audience and also the family and estate of a deceased subject in particular in terms of accuracy, as well as telling the full picture of someone's life? Because I feel like in certain cases it could border on disrespectful. It could be, a blatant money grab, which would turn people off. As like if they don't have some level of commitment to accuracy, then the ulterior motives harm the project and are visible.
I think there's a mutual agreement that we as viewers can understand that they might embellish some parts or speed up some parts or maybe adjust the timeline here and there for the sake of the story. But also, we expect that you need to be pretty accurate in the story that you are telling, because it's all in the film's marketing too, right? The true story, the behind the scenes look. You have to be accurate. One reason you have to be accurate is because there's already been so much reporting on these artists over the years.
That's a good point.
If you start lying about things, the audience or critics, first and foremost, are going to pan your film, saying, they screwed up the timeline here. Like Freddie Mercury died of AIDS. That's what happened. And they're pretending like he didn't. You have to be honest. Otherwise, critics and viewers are going to punish you by not showing up for your film. Yeah. And then you made this story and nobody's seeing it, and then you lost money. So I think there's just like this understanding that you guys can make some changes, but don't make too many. Otherwise, we're not going to see it. We want to see a somewhat true story, a pretty true story.
And there's ways to do that too that still offer dignity to the deceased and also to their family. I think it's okay to fade to black. We don't have to actually watch somebody die of a drug overdose. That it's perfectly fine to fade to black and just say so and so died on this day from drug related, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of biopics do that, and it's still effective,
Yeah.
Yeah, especially after you spent 90 minutes getting to know the person, to find out you don't get even another scene with them
and also maybe that's the point. I think like sometimes like all we know of somebody is like, oh yeah, that person died. Like with Elvis, if somebody's not familiar with Elvis's catalog, maybe all they know is like he died in the bathroom. But like spending 2 hours with somebody on film is like, well, they're more than just like this one low moment in their life.
So we'll get to some examples of, inaccuracies, but I think going on this topic too of like doing right by the family, there are plenty of examples of like people who were either tangential to or adjacent to the people that were depicted in the films or were themselves depicted in the film, I guess, inaccurately. Like neither member of the Runaways, Joan Jett or Sherry Curry, really feel particularly fond of the biopic called The Runaways with Kristen Stewart and Dakota Fanning. Just saying it is not accurate. It's Hollywoodified to the umpteenth. I found an example where in the Buddy Holly story, which was one of the first ones within the scope of what we're talking about, 1978, they changed the names of the crickets and the personalities because they only had the rights to Buddy Holly's story and not that of these other living people. And so there you have a situation where you're making a project, but you're having to obfuscate and change the truth because you can't almost tell the truth in that case. It's just an interesting situation to be in. And then, you get these examples, like you were saying, Andrew, too, of the Freddie Mercury one in particular. Is like, I think the film has him dying long time before he actually did, shortly after the Live Aid performance. And that's not how it happened. They also throw in things like the band Queen leaving EMI, when the record execs won't publish Bohemian Rhapsody as a single. In truth, Queen stayed with EMI for more than 20 years after Mercury died.
Right. And the Bohemian Rhapsody example in particular is the most interesting to me because you still have surviving members of the band that were heavily involved. And so then you start to wonder, right. So then you start to wonder, because they're like fully endorsing this movie, why they decided it was okay to do that. And like, if they just like decided to cut their losses because you have to pick and choose your battles with like the writers and the producers, or if they were like, yeah, let's just rewrite history and like make ourselves look better. It's just weird.
It is interesting though that when one of these music biopics is being put together, that they do have to take into consideration the people who are alive. And this happens with biographies too. Thinking about my husband, Bruce Springsteen, he published his memoir several years ago. And at the very end of the book, he writes, "I haven't told you all about myself. Discretion and the feelings of others don't allow it." You have to be kind to people who are still alive. You can, but it's not right to throw people under the bus if they are still alive.
Yeah.
You have to be respectful of people. So I think that's one very important aspect that's at play with these biopics too. You can't tell the full true story because there are still people out there who don't want the true story out. But Bruce also goes on to say, in a project like this, the writer has made one promise to show the reader his mind. In these pages, I've tried to do that. So you still kind of get to the same goal. You still try to get the same message that you would have, but you do have to show discretion.
The ghostwriter did a really good job with that book.
Wow. Why are you coming for him like that? He wrote this himself.
No. It's actually an excellent quote. And I think that's great. I think it speaks to exactly what we're talking about here. In some cases, I wonder if like the real story, the better story, isn't the stuff that's getting left out here in the biopic. I mean, the movie, any of these movies seems to have like a shorter scope if they don't get into some of the other things, I think.
Yeah, but I guess we can always hold out hope that one day new versions of these stories will come out and we'll maybe get better stories because of it. But like, I have no issues with Bohemian Rhapsody, the movie. I have no issue with Rocket Man.
So what are your favorite biopics? And I'll add a sub heading here, which is, what do you look for? What do you want out of a biopic?
Well, when it comes to music biopics, I think it's awesome if they're able to put together a really great new soundtrack. And yeah, sorry, I'm going to bring up Rocket Man again. I am a big Elton John fan, so I was very excited to see this movie, and I like that it was based on his book, though I think I saw the movie first and then read the book. But the soundtrack for Rocket Man is excellent. Taron Egerton, who stars as Elton John, performed the music himself on the soundtrack, and I really appreciated that. And I was listening to that soundtrack for months after it came out, and some of it still comes up in my Spotify from time to time. So that was just a perfect, well-rounded music biopic. Not only did you get a pretty true version of Elton's story, he signed off on even the hard parts of his life, depicting those, but you also got an artist who could sing, and they re-recorded all of Elton's music with Taron Egerton. So
that's a heck of an accomplishment too. And I know some people would be like purists, like, who's this actor singing these songs? But on the other hand, you get this new interpretation that is fueled by that actor's own passion, I think, for the project. Is like any actor that wants to put themselves through the process of recording a soundtrack when they could just, not do that and collect the check and still do the great performance in the movie. Wow.
Right.
But
Yeah.
It reminds me
in
of
this
when
case too, I would say Elton John was involved in selecting Taron Egerton, who has always been able to sing, I should say. So I think that that is helpful in terms of putting a stamp of approval on it. It leaves a way more bitter taste in the mouths of fans when it's just some executive in Hollywood being like, let's just pick this person because they look similar. Or let's just stunt cast this person because they're a pop star, but they can't act, but we'll figure it out along the way. So I think therein lies the difference for sure.
The one I'll go for, and I've liked every biopic I've seen of musicians, but the one I'll just shout out in case anyone on this panel hasn't seen it yet, and otherwise, is Amadeus. Now, again, greatly fictionalized. It's not been proven that Salieri did the things in the film that they say he does. But it's ultimately this amazing story of a brilliant mind, and showcases some of the same things we've talked about today in the formula, the struggling both with brilliance and with either poverty or drugs, etc. It's also kind of a twofer because it's a period piece. So you get something, it's hundreds of years ago, you get all this really interesting stuff. I first saw Amadeus in history class because there were elements of the story, particularly as we said about, musicians being sort of the court musician that the king paid, that are in this movie that you just wouldn't expect because it's so far removed from sort of, Tower Records, La La Land kind of thing. So Amadeus definitely, all time great for sure. And it won, I think, the most Academy Awards so far of what could be maybe construed to be a music biopic.
I think probably the one that I always go back to is the Selena biopic from 1997. But I'd say that having some issues with it, particularly, and I think most people that are fans of Selena will say the same, especially if they happen to be Mexican American, which was that the biopic was just made so shortly after her death that it just feels like they always left a bad taste in my mouth, knowing that the family just basically buried their daughter and then went straight into doing this movie.
Wow.
Yeah, because she died, I think, in 1995, 1996, and then this movie came out in 1997. So it was a very quick turnaround. And nobody really likes A.B. Quintanilla Sr., just her dad. He's like the Mexican Joe Jackson, honestly. So if you know anything about how the Jackson 5 and their momager dad was with the kids, then you have a pretty good idea of how A.B. Quintanilla was with Selena and her siblings, which made up her backing band or part of her backing band. Anyway, this basically has it all. I think it's just really good. Great performance by Jennifer Lopez. This is basically her claim to fame. Something that I look for in biopics of the music variety is if somebody can pull off a good performance, and she is definitely a performer. I think that she just nails Selena from the dancing to the stage presence and the transformation that she made like for this movie was just it's really well done. And then my honorable mention is the Jacksons, An American Dream. There's a lot of parallels here. This was actually a mini series that I remember airing on VH1 in the 90s. It came out in 1992, so that's probably why it was like always on. And this was like probably my gateway into like my fascination with music biopics, regardless of whether I knew that or not at the time. This was like one of those things my brother and I just watched way too young because it was on TV and we were like so fascinated by it and probably out of order and stuff like that. But yeah, this is really good. And also like a great example of like a family that was involved with, producing that did not shy away from sugarcoating the bad stuff that was happening too as the group was rising to fame. So it cuts off in the 80s, I think in 1983, but that makes sense because the movie, the miniseries started airing in 1992, but it's still worth a watch. I'll still like tune in if I see it pop up on TV from time to time too. It's about 4 hours long.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
All right. Well, we're going to look ahead to upcoming biopics. Pam's compiled a really awesome list. But before we do that again, here is another word from our sponsors. We're back. And Pam, what is coming down the pipeline? Which music biopics are we going to be in line for Friday night?
Yeah, so many, honestly. This is like why I think some people are getting fatigued by the amount of music biopics. So there have already been a few that have come out this past year, but we're just going to go on like what has yet to hit theaters. So coming up before the end of this year, we'll have the Bob Dylan biopic starring Timothée Chalamet called A Complete Unknown. And then next year in 2025, we have two big, highly anticipated ones. One is the Michael Jackson biopic. So talk about something that will be interesting to see how.
Yeah, how honest is that one going to be?
How honest is that going to be? Jafar Jackson is playing Michael Jackson, and he is a nephew of the late singer as well. So clearly the family is involved
so
in
that
some
one's
way.
not going to be too honest.
Yeah. And then we have Andrew's beloved Bruce Springsteen's getting the biopic treatment, Deliver Me From Nowhere, starring Jeremy Allen
Following the
White.
creation of just one album, by the way, and it's one of his most unique, let's say, albums. Very intimate type of album. Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. It's based on a book, too, this movie is. So it'll be interesting to see how that they pull that off. But yeah, Jeremy Allen White, that'll be pretty cool.
And then in 2027, this is one that I'm actually pretty excited for. Sam Mendes is undertaking a 4-part Beatles biopic. So it'll be one movie for each of the 4 members. And you will be able to see those stories intertwine as well as the movies get released.
That's going to be a new Avatar franchise and that it's never going to get completed.
But I'm fascinated by how this is going to get pulled off. And yeah, so I'll be in line for this one for sure.
I'm really excited, especially as a huge Beatles fan. I listened to a number of audiobooks about them, and I have this really long one called Tune In, The Beatles, that ends, it's like thousands of pages and ends in 1962. So before they get famous. But it chronicles like the Berlin years, the early stuff. Their relationships with one another is, it's the stuff of legend. And so I really do want to see the interplay with those actors, hope that it's captured well, and really just the music, the vibes are going to be great.
Mm-hmm. And then a couple of artists that are also getting the biopic treatment that I've yet to establish release dates include Boy George, the Bee Gees, Janis Joplin, Madonna, Linda Ronstadt, Frank Sinatra, Britney Spears. And then there's a La Bamba remake that is currently in the works as well. La Bamba came out in I think the 80s. Mm-hmm. Richie Valens, starring Lou Diamond Phillips, who is not Latino. So I guess that's kind of part of the reason that they're looking to remake that. And then there's also, this is a newer one. There is a Sublime biopic in the works. And Riverdale star KJ Apa recently signed on to star as the late frontman Bradley Noel.
Wow.
What's interesting about this list is that Britney Spears stands out amongst everybody else. Every other artist, with the exception of Bradley Noel, who died young. He died young, but in the 90s, right? Britney Spears is one of the biggest artists today for our generation, even though she doesn't currently release new music. So I think that one's going to do really well. She seems to be involved with this project. It's presumably going to be based on her book, Piece of Me. Or sorry, The Woman in Me. I always want to call it Piece of Me. Directed by John M. Chu, who is directing Wicked, right?
Yes.
Oh.
Mark Platt is producing as well. Mark Platt produces a lot, but yeah, he also has a pretty good background with music. So
okay. And Britney's book is very open. She exposes a lot. So I'm inclined to think that the movie is going to be pretty eye-opening as well, and probably a difficult watch.
The thing for me is it seems like, so we're in 2022 and, we're going to be looking at an era of the late 90s, early 2000s, when she's like coming into fame and prominence. And so that'll be the really interesting thing for me, is looking at what the music industry was like in the 90s and 1000s. Because if you look at all these artists that were big in the 80s, 70s, 60s, we're ultimately getting these older stories, and, like anything evolved. So I'd be interested in seeing what, who's cast as Justin Timberlake and, all the other artists that we followed at that time.
And we actually were just talking on Millennial about Diddy's case that he's now facing in court. This Britney movie, presumably it's still a good 2 years away, will be coming out after we've probably learned a lot about Diddy and about the music industry on a whole. So the timing there is kind of interesting as well.
That is interesting. Yeah. So that, I believe, is the hype about biopics. But we should all endeavor to catch them more, especially because another good reason to watch them is to get familiar with their music. Like, I would absolutely want to know more about Ray Charles's music. I just haven't watched the biopic yet. So
I see these trailers in theaters. I'm like, wow, that looks really good. I'm definitely going to see that. And then I just don't. And that's on me. I need to see more of the movies. You're right.
Yeah. I mean, the newest ones, Amy Winehouse, there's one in Amy Winehouse. There's one in Bob Marley.
Oh, really? The Winehouse one we can skip?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
It's like borderline offensive.
Guess we won't be getting Back to Black. There's only one love, right? That's the Bob Marley one. Okay,
that one I have not seen. But talk about these biopics. We're getting 3 alone this year. We're by the time we're done with the year, because One Love, Amy Winehouse.
There are surges. There are surges, and worth noting. Apart from the hundreds of documentaries on the Beatles, there have been biopics about them before, or maybe small, shorter scope.
Nowhere Boy is a great one.
Nowhere Boy about John Lennon's early years. It's been attempted before, but I think largely the story must be considered too big to tell in one film. Hence, Sam Mendes doing it in at least 4. But if you even look at Get Back, the documentary by Peter Jackson, it's 8 hours, and it's just half of one album creation. Is just unbelievable. It's crazy. Well, we also want to thank our listeners for listening to this. We are a new show, and we do need your support. Please follow us in your favorite podcast app and leave a review. It's going to help make the show a success. Please also, if you can spare a follow, click that button on social media. We're on TikTok, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram as What the Hype Podcast. Our website is whatthehypepodcast.com. And on X, of course, because we had to be different on X, we are What the Hype Show. If you want to email us about anything, please do that at whatthehypepodcast@gmail.com. And also, does a friend or family member need convincing about why music biopics are worth a watch? Share this episode with them and tell them we're walking through every aspect of pop culture each week on What the Hype. And that's the hype.
Bye.